A few videos ago, I discussed why I thought the Teal Mask DLC was not a pay-to-win addition to Scarlet and Violet, but instead, I felt like it was a healthy enhancement to these games. This provided the format with a lot of unique pieces that, while they were not overbearing, they definitely added a lot of depth to the format, and it made Regulation E, in my opinion, one of the best formats that we've ever had this gen. But then the Indigo disc came out, and while I think this format did end up improving a lot of issues that I had with Regulation E, at the same time though, I feel like it's actually really made the format almost, if not definitively, a pay-to-win format. This is going to take a lot to unpack here, and I feel like there's a lot on both sides of the argument. So we're going to start by laying out the groundwork and find out for certain if the Indigo disc DLC is in fact pay-to-win for VGC. So I want to start by listing off the things that are objectively not pay-to-win about this DLC, and things that really, if you just know the resources, you can get a lot out of this without having to buy the DLC for $30. Starting off, there are actually a lot of returning Pokemon, and while there are varying levels of viability with these, objectively, there's a lot of good ways that you can get these without buying the DLC. Thanks to a lot of fan-created codes that have been promoted by a lot of different YouTubers, there are actually a lot of ways to get some really incredible Pokemon, such as Incineroar, through just knowing the right link code. And this is all very accessible information if you just look up one of these videos. While I would say that Incineroar is probably the most noteworthy option, the next runners-up are pretty niche options like Metagross and Whimsicott, so there aren't really a lot of Pokemon you can get this way if you're looking to build a serious team, unless if you really know what you're doing. That's not to say you can't build a good team for the ladder, or maybe a good team to play your friends that will hold its own, but if you're looking to win a regional, it's probably really only Incineroar you're going to get out of this, unfortunately, which leads into the next point being the Legends accessibility. Now, I will say that, unfortunately, Legendary Pokemon accessibility is a pretty big issue when discussing any format, but I think that Regulation F has been the big nail in the coffin for this becoming a genuine issue with the scene. Now, I don't even actually blame the Indigo disc DLC for this, as you get a lot of options to catch for Legendary Pokemon, and besides a couple of exclusive options like the Urshifu forms and Spectre and Calyrex, these aren't DLC specific Pokemon. You could transfer these from older versions and still use them fine in competitive. However, one of the biggest issues with this though is the fact that this requires Pokemon Home if you want to do this method, meaning you either need Pokemon Home or you need to buy the DLC. And there still are some issues, but this becomes a really big factor in regards to discussing why the Legend issue is a big deal, which means that we will need to take a detour over to everyone's favorite VGC topic, genning in VGC. Now, when it comes to genning in VGC, I do want to preface that I actually have a video coming out next week that will hopefully go a lot more in depth on this topic, as it truly does deserve its own video, but I'm going to go over the bare minimum to discuss this topic in this video. Now, I will say the biggest issue when it comes to the genning portion of this comes with the legendary Pokemon. As of Worlds 2023, there was a huge spike in players actually being disqualified for genning Pokemon due to the fact that Pokemon was cracking down on what was actually considered legitimate. When it came to checking Pokemon, there was a really big pressure on players to obtain their own Pokemon themselves and to have no outside help, which already gets into a pretty big issue on why this is a big factor in the DLC. I can probably count on one hand the amount of Pokemon that you really would have maybe needed outside help for, and it was really just Urshifu, Cresselia, Iron Hands, Fluttermane, or Landorus, and otherwise you could probably catch the rest of the Pokemon you were using for your team on your own copy of Scarlet and Violet. However, as the formats went on, there are not only a lot more options for Pokemon that are viable transfer picks, but there's also a lot more pressure to be using these Pokemon, as they are some of the best contenders and they fill up most of the top spots. These genning issues have definitely carried on into events in Regulation F though, and it's become a lot more prevalent. When most of the top format is dominated by Pokemon such as Tornadus, Landorus Incarnate, the Ogerpon forms, and many other Pokemon that you either need the DLC for or a previous generation game for, this genning issue becomes a big deal because these Pokemon need proper home tracking, they need proper movesets, they need proper OT and IT information, etc. And it is a lot harder to get a Pokemon through other players because you don't know if the Pokemon you're getting is objectively going to be usable. Now, the Indigo Disc DLC gave us 4 Paradox Pokemon that are exclusive to the DLC, and they're all static encounters, being Iron Crown, Iron Boulder, Gouging Fire, and Raging Bolt. Gouging Fire and Raging Bolt are the Scarlet exclusives, and Iron Crown and Iron Boulder are the Violet exclusives, and you can only catch them one time per save file, meaning that you need to beat the entire game, you need to beat the Area 0 post game, you need to catch 200 Pokemon in the Indigo Disc DLC, and then you can finally get your hands on Iron Boulder, Iron Crown, Gouging Fire, or Raging Bolt. This is a pretty big hurdle to overcome for some of these Pokemon, and considering the fact that Gouging Fire and Raging Bolt have consistently been top tier high performing threats, winning multiple events, and Iron Crown has still been a pretty consistent day 2 Pokemon, it's really hard to say these Pokemon aren't pay to win. When I need to replay through basically the entire story and the entire DLC story just to make sure that I can end up getting these Pokemon, it's a really big chore just to be able to get a Pokemon that I could trade to a friend if they don't have the DLC. meaning that it's a lot more likely that I want to keep my copy of them. This also stings really badly for Violet players because, objectively speaking, Gouging Fire and Raging Bolt are significantly more consistent options, and they're locked behind Scarlet's DLC. This is an extremely huge barrier to entry, and while these Pokemon aren't required to win, Raging Bolt is only continuing to go up in usage, and it's matching the likes of options like Fluttermane and Incineroar in most events, and it's only going up. And Gouging Fire is now consistently either a cusp pick for top 12 or just making top 12 in regional results. To make matters worse, options like Fluttermane that were also Scarlet exclusives are still top tiers, and while you can definitely still obtain these easily, it's not exactly a benefit for Violet players because it's still another Pokemon that you're encouraged to get from a friend because it's a Scarlet exclusive, but then if you get it from a friend, you might be disqualified. There's very few Pokemon you could just catch in your games without worrying about version exclusives for, and it's literally just Amoonguss and Goldengo at this point. If you want anything else, you either need a DLC or you need to hope you have the right version of the game. If you want to really leave salt in the wound too, most players probably have Urshifu Rapid because it was by far the better Urshifu form in Regulation E, and now they need to either replay their Sword and Shield DLC or get the Scarlet and Violet DLC to get a Cub through again, because Single Strike is so much better than Rapid Strike right now, and it is highly performing at most events. For a Pokemon like Raging Bolt, however, I need a friend who can play through the game quickly, get me my copy, and replay through it to get theirs with a short amount of time. I will say though that while Gouging Fire I did mention is another Pokemon that Scarlet provides, it is better than probably both Violet forms. It's not as vital for success, but if you're playing any sort of physical spam archetype, it is probably one of the best Pokemon you could be using right now, and it's only continuing to go up in usage due to the sets like Howl, Boost Your Energy Speed that are really strong enablers for most physical Pokemon right now. I'd probably compare Gouging Fire to something more so like Ogerpon, where while it enhances the format, it's not objectively needed for success. But Raging Bolt though, that fixes a lot of matchups. It's the best counter you can get to Torn Shifu, which is still a prevalent playstyle despite Urshifu Single getting a lot better usage right now. And it also is just a great revenge killer for most of the best Pokemon in the format. Now, we could definitely get into two other Paradox Pokemon that I have very much chosen to ignore that are now legal in Regulation F, but Walking Wake and Iron Leaves are both pretty niche, with Walking Wake having some okay usage and Iron Leaves just being unusable. But really, despite the fact that it does continue to say that Scarlet got the better DLC Legends, it doesn't really change anything because Walking Wake is still probably weaker than both Iron Boulder and Iron Crown in my opinion. Now that we've established the Divide and Version exclusives, let's tie the whole saga up with a pretty little ribbon. Do you guys remember our previous video how I really overemphasized on Ogerpon's usage? This is her now. She's a consistent meta-defining Pokemon with a really clear bias towards the Wellspring form, getting usage that's rivaling Fluttermane with just this form alone. With the downfall of Rapid Strike Urshifu in favor of Single Strike, Ogerpon Wellspring is now the by far best water type you could be running in the format. For Ogerpon's Wellspring form to be getting such high usage, this doesn't suddenly mean that it's just making up for the usage of his other forms. They're all still getting very good usage. Tealpon has actually risen a lot in this format as a really strong response to the Intimidate spam going on right now. Corner Pond is still a decent option for Trick Room teams, and Hearthflame Ogerpon is still as dominant as ever, getting a lot of high results as a really incredible wall breaker. It's just that Wellspring is now used so much more often that it's basically like you're fighting an Ogerpon on almost any serious team. Considering the fact that it was really rare to see even one Ogerpon form make top 12 usage, and now we're consistently seeing Ogerpon as a top 3 used Pokemon in most events, it's really hard to deny that Ogerpon is also now a significantly more essential piece when it comes to proper team building. This makes a really awful pairing too, because with the Ogerpon still being prevalent, the fact that Raging Bolt and Urshifu Single now limit the use of Terra Dragon in favor of Terra Fairy significantly, Ogerpon only continues to thrive that much more. And you really do kind of need to wonder if you can actually build a serious team without at least one of the Paradox Pokemon these games introduced for the DLC, or an Ogerpon form these games introduced for the DLC. So with all this in mind, is the Indigo Disc a pay-to-win DLC? I think by definition, you can't say for certain this is a pay-to-win DLC, but I would definitely say that if we're going without the literal definition of pay to win, this feels like a very pay to win DLC. Especially with all the accessibility issues plaguing the format and the fact that you can't easily trade with friends anymore because you're risking getting punished with the forfeit loss even if you actually got your teams legitimately. It's really hard to say this isn't a pay-to-win format anymore. Did you know that over 90% of the people that are watching this video right now probably aren't even subscribed to the channel? If everyone who's watched today's video and enjoyed it, make sure to like the video and subscribe. We'd honestly probably hit 1K today. While you're hitting down there, also again, remember to like and make sure to leave a comment on if you think this is a pay-to-win DLC, as I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts below. Also remember to check out our editors. We have two that really keep this channel alive, with the first being Kurt, who edits all of these long-form videos that you guys see. And if you enjoy watching these long-form videos, Kurt's the guy to check out. He does an incredible job on all of them. We've also actually brought on a new editor over the last couple weeks, being Matt, who's been killing it on the short form content. If you guys have found me through the short form content, which I know a lot of you guys have recently, make sure to check out Matt. He does a great job with these short form videos, and honestly, I really couldn't do it without him. So make sure to check out both of them. Their links will be in the description below, as well as hopefully I remember to put up annotations for them. But with that said, I'm going to see you guys next week for probably the most controversial video that has ever went on this channel, being discussing the ethics of genning. So hopefully you guys are here for that, and hopefully the channel somehow exists still by then. Peace out, guys.